and welcome to the Author Roundup, a special segment of the Book Connection Show where we meet up and coming indie authors and talk to them about their recently released books. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Author Roundup. I'm Jenny, and today we're joined by a guest who has 2 decades of leadership experience across government, social, and industry sectors. He's also the author of the Eureka Moments for Leadership newsletter on LinkedIn, where he shares practical, everyday insights on leadership, innovation, and team development. His new book, Eureka Moments of Leadership 50 Days to Becoming a Better Leader, is a collection of real time lessons from a practicing executive. Short, engaging chapters offering insights that translate directly into everyday leadership. And in line with his belief that leadership is about making a difference, a portion of the book's proceeds goes to Methodist Welfare Services. Please join me in welcoming Eugene To. Hi, Eugene. So glad you're here.
Hi, Jenny. So good to see you.
I'm so excited to talk to you about your book. Tell us about Eureka Moments of Leadership. What was the original Eureka moment that sparked the idea for this book?
The eureka moment was when I was in a bookstore with my 13-year-old son. He was looking at a collection of TED Talks, and I was browsing the book with him. It was very useful as a summary, but I thought I could up the game by inserting a personal story to each of the TED Talks that was in the book. So I decided to give it a try on a LinkedIn post. So I would come up with a story of my own that is related to the TED Talk framework that I was listening to that day, and then write down my reflections and my learning points. I decided to give myself a challenge of doing it 50 in a stretch. That was slightly over 7 weeks. And this was the product. So I never intended it to be a book, but as it got longer and longer as the days went by, people said, why don't you put them together? And here we go.
Wow, that's amazing. So 50 stories. You're able to come up with 50 stories. So, and I think it's a very good approach, like personalizing a TED Talk or something like that, just to make sure that your son would be able to relate to it much better, right?
Yes.
So, why write about leadership? What made you want to contribute to this space?
I think leadership is about influence. In most people's minds, leadership is in the corporate context where you lead a team. But I think it pervades every aspect of our life. Even in my family, if I'm a parent, I'm a leader because I exert influence, whether I realize or not. In my personal circles, my friends, I exert leadership or not because I can determine the amount of influence I want to change, whether it's the plans of my friends. But of course, we see it in the work context where there are explicit teams and organizations formed. And at the end of the day, I think it is about learning how to work with people better. So I wrote this book as a way to pen down my reflections of my leadership journey, starting from a very low base, where I once upon a time was a very quiet, introverted person, to today, where people will say he's a pretty good storyteller and a visionary leader in every aspect. And I'm still growing. So the point of this book is that leadership is a growth journey. It never ends. And ultimately, by penning it down, it's also a gift for my son, but also for my future self. When I look back in time and space to see how I have developed certain skills and relationship building mechanisms to bring myself the next level.
Wow. So you are able to share your journey with the rest of the world through your book. So earlier you said it all began with LinkedIn posts. How did these posts help shape your voice and your message? And how did you choose which 50 stories to include in your book?
Well, so making myself post daily means that I have to be honest, real, and raw because I don't have a calendar of content. I am literally writing on the go. But that has the advantage of making myself vulnerable, and in that sense helps me connect with readers because many of the situations that I post are relatable to them. And many a times I don't have the answers because I'm still grappling with them. But I try to find frameworks and lessons that others have gone through to bring it to my situation. And hopefully that helps my readers be able to apply that in their situation. How I find those stories? It's about curating my everyday life stories. I give you an example. My family used to have air conditioning service providers. So we will call them service provider A and service provider B. So service provider A comes in and makes a big lots of noise about how difficult it is to service our aircon. And then after 4 hours of work, he says that it's done and he leaves, right? And then 6 months later, we get another service provider. We call him B. He makes no noise. He's a hard worker, and he does it in 2 hours, right? They cost the same price, right? In terms of fees, the quality is about the same. And I will ask my family members, why do you always call A back, right? And the answer was because there's better value for money. He delivered 4 hours of work. And that gives me then the opportunity to reflect, are we pricing efficiency
Mm.
over effort, right? And I think that's a fallacy that all leaders need to be aware of. But it is through such everyday moments that I curate that makes it relatable, but also interesting for readers.
I see. So the stories that you included in your book would have like a personal flair to it. Yeah. Like it could be an anecdote of, what happened, or is that how you
Yeah.
present
So
it in the book?
so every day there will be a personal story.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is a struggle that
Mm-hmm.
I'm going through. Sometimes it can be a dilemma where there are no clear answers.
Mm-hmm.
So I present it as a challenge or a question for my readers. Then I look for a TED Talk video
Mm-hmm.
that is related to that situation I'm in. I go through it, I summarize it in the book. Usually there is a good framework or principles that I can draw from. And then I give my reflections at the end of the day on how that framework could be applicable in that situation.
I see. That's a very interesting way of presenting your thoughts and your ideas to the world through your book.
Yeah. So I thought that's why I thought it is interesting to be able to pen it down like that and then share it with my readers.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, Eugene, the chapters of your book are short, reflective, but very much packed with insight. How did you develop this storytelling format?
Yeah, I start each chapter with a real situation that I have faced before or I'm facing at the moment. And then I pull out a framework from a TED Talk that is related to that leadership moment. And then each chapter ends with a practical takeaway, application materials that leaders can bring back to their own leadership encounters. Because I think stories anchor the heart and frameworks sharpen the mind. So that was how I developed the storytelling format so that each chapter is designed to be a small leadership insight that fits naturally into a busy leader's daily rhythm.
I see. And also, I have noticed that, well, you talked about this a little bit earlier, that the chapters of your book, they blend personal anecdotes with external TED Talks. So, how did you balance personal versus educational content?
It's a good question because when I look out there, I see many books on leadership, and they are written by two categories of people. One, retired leaders who now probably have the time and space to write. Secondly, they are also the professional speakers or professional authors who will write something but may not have the real life experience. I coming from an angle as a practicing executive who is still struggling or wrestling with the struggles and challenges. And I think that is a unique differentiator of my book, that my story shows the struggle and sometimes the solution is not apparent. But I hope the frameworks and my reflections help my readers to bring value to whatever situation that they are facing. And I think that's part of leadership. Leadership written while leading, with all its messiness, urgency, yet meaning.
Okay, how do you develop your stories to resonate with leaders at different levels? I know this project or this book started out as something that you want to give to your son, or it started out with your son, but it resonates with leaders at different levels, from newbies to experienced executives. How did you develop your stories to be that way?
Well, first of all, I think there are some leadership emotions that are universal, regardless of where you come from. Emotions like trust, doubt, resilience, motivation. And you then try to distill that into something that is relatable. So let me give you one story. There was a leadership moment which shaped my thinking when I noticed something strange in my team in a particular moment. During those high pressure late night projects, the team was actually pretty motivated. They were buzzing with energy. But there are times where it was life was a bit simpler and we were doing routine stuff. And then there was a clear sense of lethargy. And that made me reflect. So I came up with this sports analogy. So in soccer competitions, you have three types of games. One is the league matches. So these are your day-to-day matches that you play. And then at the end of the day, you see how many points and the team with the highest number of points win. Then you have the cup competitions, right? So it's a knockout rounds, right? And if you lose one game, you're out of it. And then you have those exhibition games where preseason or friendly matches where you experiment. And I think sometimes leadership is like that, right? There are those routine activities that you have to gear your team to do, those steady day-to-day consistent routine work. And you just have to make sure that there's enough of it to get them going. But from time to time, it's good to inject some excitements, those knockout rounds, right? To say that this is high stakes, let's go for it, give me your best for that 2 weeks. And after that, we can take a break. And then when there's a bit more room to grow and learn, we have the exhibition matches, right? You can play around, we encourage them to grow. It's okay to make a bit of mistakes here and there. They're experimenting both individually as a team. And at the end of the day, I think as leaders, we use different framings depending on the situations to draw out the best from our teams.
Mhm. Okay. Also, something interesting is that you didn't just write this book, you also illustrated it, right? So, what role do visuals play in how you teach leadership?
Yeah, so I'm also a practicing artist. I decided that it would be very interesting if I could combine my writing and my artwork into a book. And actually, it's inspired by the magazine called The Economist. One of my favorite segment is this editorial cartoons that you see in the front part of the magazine. I think drawing can distill complex truths into emotional anchors, and it not only helps us remember the lessons, but if you draw it well, it can be both witty, memorable, but also more feelable.
Yes, definitely. And you're also very open about your personal fears and failures in this book. Why was it important for you to show vulnerability in your leadership journey?
Because I think the best leaders demonstrate vulnerability from time to time, right? And ultimately, real leadership is messy. One moment that stayed with me was having to deal with a difficult peer leader. He was blocking my project at every move of the way. I was frustrated, I was angry, I wanted to get back in my own way. Until one of my mentors suggested, why not have lunch with him and catch up with him, right? which was what I did. And along the way, I found out that when he was in college, he went through 4 years without having a meal with another person. And that struck me, right? That he wasn't trying to be difficult, but perhaps he was socially awkward, and his ways of asking blunt questions was part of his way of engaging. And that changed my perspective. I no longer see him as an obstacle, but somebody who needed connection differently, right? And the relationship became far more constructive after that, once I changed my lens. So I think leadership journey, it's about that, right? Where you demonstrate vulnerability and you build connections, and then many things can happen from there.
It will really make a load of difference if you just try to reach out, right?
It does. It does. Sometimes that one word or that one single coffee chat can
Mm.
really change the dynamics of relationships at work.
Mhm. So, with this book, Eugene, who do you think will benefit the most from it? I know it's for leaders and I know it's all about leadership, but who exactly will benefit the most from it?
I think new managers or new leaders who are trying to find their footing, they would see that in my book, it is divided into segments. So I bunch up the chapters. The first part is about personal growth, and then it then develops into segments where I talk about team dynamics and the challenges that most leaders will face. But I would think it's also relevant for experienced leaders from the perspective of storytelling and how to frame a moment so that you can connect with your team. So many of these stories are day to day, everyday moments that most of us will go through. But the difference is that I've taken the time and energy to distill them into a relatable moment or into a dilemma that I pose for readers. So I think that is something for the experienced leaders that if you are able to tease out these moments and share it with your team, it can make a difference in how to motivate and inspire them.
I see. So you told us about how your book is presented. So there are 50 stories and all that. How do you envision readers engaging with your book? Do you think they're going to be reading it from cover to cover, one chapter at a time? Or perhaps are they going to use it as a supplement to other learning materials? What do you think is the best way for the readers to engage with your book?
Yeah, some read it cover to cover. My personal preference is to do it the LinkedIn way, which is one post a day. So a chapter a day will be the right rhythm. And I think the materials in there, including the TED Talk, gives additional materials for leaders who want to go deeper, right? And so, for example, you could start listening to the TED Talk that I have recommended in each of the chapters as a way to deepen the knowledge or expertise in a particular field.
Okay, I think that's the best way to really get the most out of your book or maximize it, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about your journey as an author this time. How long did it take you to complete your book? And then, if you could tell us about your experiences, whether it's the fun part or the challenging parts, we want to know more about it.
So technically 7 weeks plus one day, right? So 50 stories, and every day I did have the discipline to write one. And of course, then there were a few more months to refine and structure the book. The illustrations took a bit longer because it was a lot more challenging trying to distill a story into one single picture that is both witty, memorable, and teachable in one sense. So I think the fun part was interacting with my LinkedIn readers along the way. So every time I had a LinkedIn post, there will be comments from my readers about what they felt about the post, what was good, what was relatable. And one of the interesting moments was somebody writing to me through LinkedIn and sharing a specific situation that she was facing. And she asked whether I could write about that the next time. That's a great idea because I don't know what I'm going to write the next day. Now that you've given me a real problem, I would research and look into that. And that was what I did. And so I found that very interactive, and that was the fun part, right? I think the challenging part was how do you keep the discipline
Mm.
to continue to write continuously every day, right? So it was a challenge, but and I put it out there for my readers. I said I'm going to do it, right? And that also helped. That there was some peer pressure or the reader pressure to keep me going.
Yeah, I see. And having gone through this journey, what did you learn about yourself when you were writing and illustrating your book?
Well, first of all, I think consistency beats inspiration. Well, we often look at leaders and say he or she was an inspiring leader because they gave a great pep talk. But actually, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Most great leaders spend a lot of time behind the scenes, honing their skills, understanding people, understanding relationships before they go into the actual moment. And I think that's something I got out of it, that being consistent in growing yourself and being intentional about what you want to do beats inspiration. The second part was about storytelling as a leadership skill, right? Through my LinkedIn posts, I sharpened my ability to mine my memories for leadership insights, to draw them out, and then use that to connect with people. And I thought it is a learnable skill. I don't think there are natural storytellers, but there is a storytelling process that all of us can learn. And when I applied that in work, it made a difference, whether it's connecting with my team, inspiring audiences during presentations, or even using them in everyday conversations so that people walk away saying, wow, I was inspired by that one.
It's really much easier to connect with someone through stories, right?
It is, it
Mm.
is. Because they have their own stories, and I think it is about the emotions that connect.
Right, I agree. So your book has been out for probably a few months now, right? And I'm sure you've been receiving feedback about your book. What feedback from your readers has surprised you the most or had the biggest impact on you?
Not the polished success stories that readers value most, but the vulnerable ones, the vulnerable moments where I share my struggles, where I share my fears. I give an example. Many people are quite surprised to hear that I used to be a very quiet person and I never made any major presentations until I was 25. They were totally surprised. They thought I was a very natural storyteller, but I had a different story to tell. That actually made people feel less alone, right? And it encouraged them to keep leading wherever they are at, and that it is a learnable skill in being able to tell a good story and to lead your team in a different way that would change how things are.
I see. So what advice would you give now to new writers who are working on their first book?
From my perspective, start small, one
Mhm.
story at a time. I think capturing honest moments. And then once you have enough materials, take one step back and see whether you can come up with a framework to be able to pull these stories differently. And ultimately, I think if you show up consistently, the collection will find its shape and ultimately the right audience for you.
Mm, right, that's correct. So, what's next in your creative or leadership horizon this time? Any plans for perhaps a follow-up book, a series, or other related projects?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, uh, uh, my initial thought was to do 100, and so I kept going. So I have another 50 stories. The title I'm looking at now is Influencing Without Authority, which is also a very good skill to have because leadership is about influence, and many of times we may or may not have the formal positions to lead, but you can definitely influence. So I am doing that. And I'm also exploring leadership workshops where I can help leaders craft their own eureka moments, pen them down, and translate into a story that they can tell to their team or their audience.
So, finally, what is your message to our viewers and listeners?
Leadership is not about titles, it's about small decisions that you consciously or unconsciously make every day. It's about trusting somebody, encouraging growth, choosing courage over fear, for instance. And ultimately, I think to find that purpose for yourself as a leader. In my case, I have committed that a portion of the proceeds will go to the Methodist Welfare Services, which is a charity in Singapore that supports individuals and families going through difficult times, whether it's poverty, social isolation, or health challenges. And I think ultimately it is about making an impact. Leadership is not just about personal growth, it's about lifting others.
Mm. Please invite them to get a copy of your book and, visit your website or follow you through your social media.
Yes, please do. And I would ask you that you would find the book on Amazon, Eureka Moments of Leadership. Connect with me on LinkedIn and follow along.
Thank you so much, Eugene To, for joining us on the Author Roundup. His book, Eureka Moments of Leadership 50 Days to Becoming a Better Leader, reminds us that leadership is something that we live out in our daily actions, not just learn about in theory. With clear, actionable insights and a commitment to making a difference, this is a resource that speaks to all leaders at every level. A portion of the proceeds supports Methodist Welfare Services, extending the book's impact beyond the page. And of course, you can find Eureka Moments of Leadership in hardcover, softcover, and ebook formats on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Partridge Publishing Singapore's online bookstore, and other major resellers. Thank you so much to all our viewers and listeners for joining us in this episode. Until next time.